Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we finally have from Florence and the Machine, Everybody Scream. Potentially contentious opinion. It's never been a better time to be a fan of Florence and the Machine. Both Highest Hope and Dance Fever were great albums, where even if there were problems, they were outshone by some genuinely terrific songs. Florence Welch has only become a more vibrant and potent vocalist. She contributed to one of Taylor Swift's best songs ever last year on Florida, and there are plenty of throaty, feminine singers with witchy vibes where you can draw that direct lineage to Florence Welch. So when I heard that the next album was opting to go darker and more confrontational, delving into folk horror and mysticism, and with that album title and hearing stories about a near-death experience due to an ectopic pregnancy and a lot of modern reproductive politics being what they are, I get it. Well, I was entirely on board. Just because we got a tour de force from Nico Case this year in the same lane doesn't mean she has to be alone in delivering it. So for this album itself, I think there can be a tension that can come with discussing this album properly, one where it's extremely tempting to bring up Florence Welch's collaborators, as they are essential in highlighting both the strengths and weaknesses on display, especially where, for as great as this is, it's hard to ignore the niggling feeling that it could have not just been their best, but one of the best albums of 2025. And while that absolutely fits in the larger canon of common frustrations with Florence and the Machine, this band has really struggled to nail the best production palette their entire careers. We'll get to it. I would be wrong to not highlight how Welch herself has been credited behind the board since High As Hope, so I will give her as much credit and blame across the board here as well, especially as her dramatic vocal intensity and gorgeous multi-track choral backdrop. It's basically the reason the majority of people seek out Florence and the Machine in the first place, especially as said backing choirs are only getting stranger, and that's a compliment. But the timbre has certainly changed since Dance Fever 3 years ago. There was a feral yet captivating joy underscoring that album, where if it wasn't fully optimistic or hopeful given the known complexities, there was a fervor to charging forth and accepting all of that complexity amidst femininity and challenging power structures, and especially the consideration of balancing out family and one's career on stage. And Everybody Scream feels like the darkest possible version of reality stabbing back at her. Not only can you tell that near-death experience of the ectopic pregnancy forced her into a steep confrontation with her own mortality, where her own poetry is bending to become more graphic and visceral to convey that trauma, but it's also confronting the systemic inequality that she is now acutely aware of with fresh and furious eyes, especially as she digs deep into the nature of her music and what it means for women specifically, both in unshackled relatability and a communal spirit. It's very revealing to me that after the seismic opening title track, which might be one of the strongest album and concert openers simultaneously I've heard in some time, with that visceral stomping groove, that she then has the raw and seething one of the greats, which undulates across tempo changes and is targeted directly at the music culture industry and the systemic sexism therein. The sacrifice of spilling so much of herself into her art and presentation, both metaphorically and physically, when she references breaking her foot on stage and the concert not getting more acclaim in the reviews. I mean, what more could she goddamn do? Especially when it feels like the industry is built to rip sanity from women, yet prop up men making boring music that gets overpraised throughout history without grappling with systemic power. Now, as a member of said industry, well, yeah, for the vast majority of this, she's just correct. There's a lot of tedious, pretentious bullshit that predominantly white dudes have propped up for decades with no self-examination. A whole lot of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is only there because of that, while holding women to a lot of impossible standards that go beyond the music. If you felt indignant or mad at me highlighting that, maybe some self-examination might be good for you. Privilege is at its best letting mediocrity in, and Welch herself highlights how in some cases she's part of the problem, giving it a pass when she might be a fan of the art. But increasingly she's realized that when any compromise is giving quarter when it's not returned, she's not gonna bother anymore. Why bother? And in the communal embrace of feminine witchcraft and art, the inexplicable and unquantifiable woven together in community, she finds a greater harmony that can embrace the challenging and the primal. She literally compares herself to a kraken on the song of that name. The breathy clatter witch dance interweaves sex with death and grief, which erupts into this crescendo of raw joy and sympathy magic to find one who can actually connect. On more than one song, she describes herself crawling out of her own grave, where art has the power to amplify emotions to that extreme. And more often than not, that performance stage at least gives her an emotional response and a tangible reality compared to the men who refuse to engage with their emotions. Even if songs like Buckle show how she's still drawn to them, Music by Men is by far the most complicated song on that album, because that lack of compromise is gonna cut both ways. And both the men who wall themselves off, often to their own detriment, but also her own choice to keep going back to the stage, the fame, the ritual, for something where she possesses a modicum of complete control. Well, at least she thinks it might, even if that's not fully fulfilling everything she wants, and where the art itself might consume her, where the industry is also not about to provide the same insulation if it does. And the project ends on a question. If you can't have it all, which the penultimate song explores in explosive detail, what love do you actually really want? Especially when it goes beyond just raw passion. Even if I find a lot of the witchy iconography a little too obvious and familiar, or in contrast, I really wish Drink Deep had a stronger hook, given the very fey dread of dabbling with the darker powers and writing, and it's got a real credible crescendo. The headfirst dive into moral complexity from Florence Welch, it's exactly where I wanted to see her writing go, which is why the production is so damn frustrating for me. And here it's more 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because the mixing and mastering is finally at the point where it feels balanced to let Welch's huge operatic runs erupt, even if there are more than a few points where a little more dynamic range could help the mix not brick out. And Mark Bowen of Idols adding more visceral guitar texture, alongside Danielle Harrell of all people punching up the grooves with some rhythms pulling from both dance music and Celtic folk. Those are great touches. And Aaron Dessner, if nothing else, is skilled at giving the percussion and grooves the space and weight to feel ponderous and climactic, make the stakes feel implacable like on The Storm Crossed the Old Religion, or the haunted country-esque Music by Men with the perfect reverb to accentuate the loneliness alongside the dreary pianos. But just like with Brandi Carlile, Dessner might be too tasteful for what Florence the Machine really needed here. John Congleton was probably the stronger answer. The homespun, brittle acoustics, a lot of the fluttery atmospheric touches, they're accessible, they're pretty, but if there's an album where you don't need to be pretty, it's this one. Kraken should have sounded like the most epic song Florence Welch has ever made, and the galloping tempo's halfway there, but then the flattened cymbal smothers out any electric guitar, which sounds like it was mixed in a tin can. Buckle is a good song, it's got a nice hook. Would have been way more charming if Nico Case didn't put out Wreck a month ago that does this entire sentiment far better without the painfully basic arrangement and production. And Love, the closer, it's saturated with these gauzy keys and fluttery plucks that do nothing for any sense of intimacy or cool down that would have fit the writing. It's a weirdly awkward and abbreviated album closer, even if the vocal runs are really pretty. And all this creates the feeling of an album that will go to some challenging places in its content, a lot of which I'm entirely on board with. I really love that. And yet, while the production has improved as well, it might actually be a little too refined in its textures for its own good. And that brings up the fascinating contradiction of Florence and the Machine, because this album is indeed great. It is exactly the direction I like seeing them go, but for as much as they've cited in the marketing Adele meets Swans as influences, you can tell at least sonically they're a lot more comfortable delivering the former in that territory than the latter. And you know, bridging that gap doesn't have to be a bad thing either. Florence and the Machine making their sound more challenging and baroque and heavy to match the subject matter, legit awesome. There is a market for that feminine rage with a mainstream adjacent structure, just that Everybody Scream needed a little bit more instrumental firepower to actually truly get there. In the meantime, I'd still argue this is the best era for this band, and while I would not call it their best, it is damn close. It's an album where rooting for its success feels like it amplifies the power, you know, a scream worth unleashing. Check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. I know I might be a little in the minority for not being quite as hot on lungs or ceremonies as others are. I do genuinely think that the last 3 Florence and the Machine albums have been their best. I kind of go up and down which is my favorite. Normally it typically winds up being High as Hope, specifically for Hunger and End to Love, but again, this is still great. I want to accentuate that, even if I think that it's another step from being the truly masterful project that it is. And yeah, probably not fortuitous timing that Nico Case put out her album Neon Grey, Midnight Green a little bit closer around, and I would argue that is better. But hey, leave your comments down there below. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if y'all want to get involved in helping support the channel, get albums on my schedule, or just yell at me on my Discord, well, links to YouTube memberships and Patreon is right over there. Don't feel obligated. Tough times out there. I'm fairly certain a recession is coming, so take care of yourselves. But the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.